Hello, debt warriors, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie O'Shea. Navicore's compassionate counseling and debt management plans offer more than just a path to paying off debt. They also provide meaningful improvements in clients' mental health and overall well-being. These plans are tailored to each individual's financial situation, offering a structured and realistic repayment strategy that fits within their budget until their debt is fully paid off. Joining me today is Navicore client Greg. After dealing with health challenges, overspending on credit cards, and taking out a large personal loan, Greg found himself overwhelmed by debt. With nowhere else to turn, he reached out to Navicore for support. In this episode, Greg and I will talk about how his debt built up, what financial education he received growing up, whether he was initially skeptical of Navicore, and so much more. Now let's dive into my conversation with Greg. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking to clients, so I'm looking forward to hearing your story today. So to get started, tell me about your situation before you started the debt management plan and how you accumulated your debt.
Yes, as we all know, debt is something that impacts the entire world and often can impact us greater than we would ever expect. And so for me, I had, saved money reasonably. I'd spent money, what I'd consider reasonably. But the biggest reason that I got put into debt was I didn't have any health insurance. And once I tore my ACL, I lost work and I lost the ability to make money as well as spend on my medical expenses at the same time. And over a period of a few years, that just continued to compound, and credit cards became my best and worst friend.
And then, did you have any financial education in the past?
I would say that I had some. Generally speaking, a lot of what we learn comes from our friends or family members, and it's not always formal. It's pretty casual most of the time. If somebody is driving a nice car, you might, out of a friendly manner, ask, "Hey, how did you afford that?" And they might say something like, "Well, my parents bought it for me," or I worked my job and I saved everything. And that was why every time we went out, you were very generous and spent money on me, or you told me that you had a bigger goal that was set in mind. So financial education for me was probably fairly minimal, as in I didn't learn what an IRA was until I had my first big job when I was 20 years old. And leading up until then, I just didn't know what I didn't know.
What life events led you to emotionally spending on credit?
I think what I had found out with my circles in high school and shortly after high school is I always wanted to be very generous when it came to spending time with my friends. I didn't want somebody to say they couldn't enjoy my company or the company of our groups if we were going to go see a movie together or if we wanted to go to a theme park in the summer. I was always somebody who was excited to say, I got it, I'll take care of you. But I don't think that I really knew if I could do it or not. And so when I started spending money, most of that came from emotional spending, was either to say, well, I still want to have time where I get to enjoy my life, or I would spend money knowing I probably can't afford this, but I think the debt that I have is too big. That what's the difference between $50 and $5,000 and $5? I don't know. I can't pay any of it. So I think emotionally, I just tried to cover that up, whether it was spending time with people or making somebody feel better about themselves.
Even though you didn't have health insurance growing up or when you were a young adult, did you have any savings, maybe like an emergency fund, any type of backup?
Yeah, what I recognized is when I would save, I usually was saving for a goal, but the goal was always to spend the savings. I don't know at what point I realized I needed to be able to take care of my future self as well as my current self. But when I was young, I always wanted to save for the next pack of Pokemon cards or maybe the next video game or maybe a skateboard. I was always saving to spend. And when I started learning about what premiums were or monthly subscriptions or basically recurring charges, then I realized, oh, savings are supposed to be there for an entirely different purpose. And not until after my health battles, if you will, that was when I realized I think I need to have money set aside for a rainy day. And also, I think I might have more rainy days on my horizon. I didn't just have the one rainy day, I have some more soon and maybe some more way down the road.
Right. Do you want to kind of talk about your health experiences with everyone?
Yeah, when I was younger, I'm in my early 30s right now. When I was in my early 20s, I wanted to become a firefighter and I wanted to become a professional soccer player. Two things that I was maybe convinced that I could do, but I had no idea if I could actually do them. And so, as I was studying and trying to decide where to go to school, I was playing soccer. And one evening, I tore my ACL, and it's a very common soccer injury. But what I didn't know was the people who tear their ACLs and come back probably had ways to come back. I had no way to come back. I had no clue or no plan. And when I searched on Google how much it cost without health insurance to pay for an ACL surgery, it said in the US it's roughly about $30,000. And to me, it might as well have been $300 million when I heard that number. And I realized most people don't have $30,000 saved and $30,000 ready to spend. And so when I had my injury, I just lived with it. I didn't have ACL surgery for almost 3 years after the first time I tore my ACL. So I walked with a minor limp and I didn't run, I didn't play sports anymore, and I just tried to find ways to work. And when I was able to get a job that had benefits, then I was able to work until I could have surgery. And what was good about that is I was able to get my physical life back. But what was a bummer is I wasn't able to recover for 6 to 9 months away from my position and then go back to it. So I basically worked until I could have surgery, had the surgery, and that was the same day that I quit my job because I had to find something else after that. So I kind of got out of one vicious cycle and kind of got put right back into another one at the same time.
Was this the point you realized that health insurance was essential not only for your health, but your finances? Is there anything else that happened that kind of led you to that?
I think in my mind I was going to tear my ACL once and I'd be good. And so I thought people make mistakes, people get help, people have ways of getting put back under their feet metaphorically and physically. And after that had happened, I figured, maybe I'll pay for health insurance again. And when I realized that I needed to jump back into working, I found out that health insurance was a small cost to pay now or a small cost to pay monthly that would become something that I had to depend on. And so there's been a few times since then where I haven't had health insurance, and I've been very, very careful not to need any type of medical intervention. But while that did show up, I realized for me and for many other people that health insurance is as vital as anything else that they have, especially when it comes to keeping their finances healthy.
And so you mentioned earlier you were kind of spending emotionally on credit cards. Did you have any other debt, such as student loan debt or personal loan debt?
Thankfully, I didn't have any student loan debt. And what's funny about that is I tore my ACL before I ever even applied to go to college. So I was hoping to go to college and I was wanting and wishing, but I never even looked online as to where is a school that maybe has a firefighting program as well as a soccer team that I could walk on and try out for. And so I never got that far into it, which was really good. But as I continued with the ups and downs of what that looked like, the debt that I later accumulated was actually a personal loan, and that was kind of spun in a way that I would say can be very helpful. But with my lack of financial education, I didn't really understand being given $10,000 doesn't make me $10,000 richer. It makes me $10,000 more on the hook than I already was. But now it's to a new lender. So I didn't necessarily stop my spending habits. It was almost like a get out of jail free card that I didn't realize that I was going to have to pay back one way or another.
So you had the personal loan you took out, and then you also still had the credit card debt, right?
Yeah, it was about enough to cover around 80% of the credit card debt that I had. So I was still accruing minimum payments and some interest as well as the interest on the personal loan. And that was scary times.
How long did it take for you to realize the amount of debt you had was an actual problem?
It was probably over a year, and I'm embarrassed to say that it took me that long of living in denial. And I'm glad that I didn't have people knocking on my door, or I was living with my parents at the time, my parents' door, and trying to make collections. I was still able to make minimum payments, but I was only making minimum payments, which was a foolish example of something that I knew a little bit about, but not enough to do effectively.
So you just mentioned you were living with your parents. Did you turn to them for advice? Did you kind of confide in them, or?
I really really wanted to talk to somebody, and I was very scared to talk about specifics because I felt better knowing that I have some debt, but I did not feel comfortable enough to even find out how much debt. And when I learned that I have to figure out how much it is, I have to encounter this problem head on, I knew that I cannot pay for all of this and I can't find a way to get out from under this debt. So I went and spoke to my parents, and they were very kind and very encouraging. And one thing that most parents will say, and it doesn't come across, generally speaking, if you have a good relationship with your parents, as condescending, but they'll always say, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" One is because they feel bad that you couldn't share that embarrassment with them. And they hope that they can kind of alleviate some of your stress or your anxiety of feeling alone. But also, when it comes to debt, if they knew sooner, they could have helped me sooner. And so it was a good life lesson, but I was also welcomed with a lot of compassion from my parents.
So let's talk about your initial call with Navicore. What was the deciding factor that led you to reach out to us? And then what was that first call like?
Yeah, when I spoke with my mom and I told her, hey, this is the situation that I got into, she said, well, when I was younger, she didn't say exactly what point in her life, but I'm pretty sure it was after she and my dad were married. She said that they both had some debt and the debt was starting to drown them financially. And she said, back in the 80s or maybe the 90s, she was able to negotiate her credit card debt with her credit lenders directly and say, if I pay you a lump sum, I can negotiate that we pay all this down and that we close the account or that we just get this under control. And that was what she had done in the past, and that worked for her pretty well. And so she said, well, let's just call one of your creditors. Let's call Capital One. And I said, okay, let's call Capital One, as I'm sitting sweating bullets in my room with her. The most fun afternoon you could possibly have. And she said, well, let's call them and let's talk to them. So we call a representative and we talk to the billing department and we tell them our situation. And they compassionately but concerningly say, well, we don't actually negotiate debt anymore. That's something that used to be done, but now we just let a different company handle it. And I said, okay, what does that mean, or what does that look like? And they said, well, here's a phone number that I want you to call. They're a company that we work with. And that phone number led me to Navicore Solutions. So we call Navicore Solutions, and I'm very confused at how this works and what this means. I'm pretty skeptical. I feel like I have to work the rest of my life to pay off this debt. That's kind of the emotional state that I'm in. And we call, and there's a very nice gentleman on the phone, one of the credit counselors, and he tells me about the systems in place and what the debt management program looks like. And I'm there very, very emotionally high, and I'm running on, anxiety and doubt. And I just feel like, well, what if I get put in a worse situation? And so I was not very kind to this poor man. And I was very skeptical and rude because he was telling me things that maybe didn't sound too good to be true, but I just thought, how can you guys possibly afford to do this? And what do you get out of it? And I remember thinking, maybe this will be good, but also maybe I'm now bringing my whole household underneath a worse debt related umbrella.
You kind of mentioned that you were skeptical of Navicore and what we did. Did you feel like there was any shame or embarrassment associated with that? Did you feel any of that with your debt?
Oh, absolutely. I realized part of the reason that I was being such a grumpy man over the telephone to a stranger was I was very distraught about my situation. And the same day I confessed my debt to my parents was the same day that we called Navicore. And so I didn't have a whole, weekend of getting out into the mountains and trying to relax and realize that, there may be hope in the horizon. It was all at once. And so it might have been a quick turnaround, but it was something that I knew I wanted to get rid of. And while we were talking on the phone, I realized I'm so embarrassed to have to tell you I have $6,000 maxed on this card, 10,000 on this one, 7 on this one, and another 7 on that one. And I have no examples of what to show where I even spent my money. I didn't buy a condo. I didn't buy 3 cars. I didn't go to university. I didn't do anything. I just bought 5, 25, $55 purchases at a time, and it compounded with all the interest that I couldn't pay. And so while I was on the phone, I really did feel embarrassed, almost like I was bothering somebody, saying, hey, I dug myself into this hole and I need you to dig me out of it now. That took a lot of humility, and I didn't show much humility that day. I'll say that for sure.
Would you recommend Navicore to someone who is struggling with debt?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the biggest factors in debt is if you have one source of debt, you probably are pretty aware of how much that debt is costing you. But generally speaking, when you get into one source of debt, you might be tempted to make every other purchase that you have relating to your mortgage or your car payments or gas or groceries, necessities or wants, onto another line of credit. And I think that credit card companies know that, and they say, hey, we can help you, and maybe they mean well, but as they as they put you further into that direction, if you don't have a way to get out of it, you just keep going further. And so with Navicore's, with their debt management program, I think what really really helped is we said, okay, we're going to proverbial stop the bleeding by closing these accounts. You're not going to have the temptation to spend because you're not going to have the power to spend money that you don't have anymore. That for me was very, very helpful to say, right now, I'm not a trustworthy financial person, so you should not trust me. My credit scores see the dip, so you can tell that I'm not trustworthy right now, but I hope to gain the trust one day. And having all of it put together with a lower monthly payment, because I had 4 credit cards that all became under the debt management plan. The amount that I was paying per month to Navicore to help cover my debt was lower than what I was paying minimum payments. So the fact that I was able to pay lower minimum payment made it possible for me to make the monthly payment, but also the interest was cut smaller than what it was because most credit cards are between 22 to 29%. All of mine were above 24%. But after Navicore helped with the debt management, they lowered every percentage I had of interest to 12% or less. So even from that alone, if that's what they said we could do, I would say this is fantastic. But they also said, we're going to give you a light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to give you a term for this is how many months you're going to work with. And I think that helped me realize I don't have to win the lottery to pay off my debt. I just need a plan, and I need a way to tell you and to tell me that I can keep consistent with that plan.
Have you referred anybody to the program since you've been on?
Yeah, after I got engaged, I found out that my wife and I, we both had some consumer debt, but we also had our own separate debt. We hadn't joined all of our accounts at the time. We didn't do any of that until we got married. And as we were planning to save for the wedding, I realized that she and I both had some debt, and we were both gaining debt as we were planning and paying for the wedding and the honeymoon. And I talked to her one day and I said, well, I've been working with Navicore for about 3 years at this point of my 5-year plan. I think that this is something that could really help us. So indirectly, because it also affected my own household, I was able to refer my wife. And so now we're both Navicore members.
And do you find it difficult to discuss money problems with your wife? Maybe now that you're both clients or even before, how would you compare?
I think that anybody who can discuss money is either incredibly confident or incredibly kind. And if you can discuss debt, which is like the worst type of money conversation, you're a saint walking the earth. And so I would say that we've had conversations that have been good, and we've had conversations that end in tears for both of us. And I think the biggest reason why sometimes it's hard to have these conversations is you feel like you're saying, I think that you're bad because of your decisions, or I think that you believe that I am bad because of my decisions. And it really puts your mistakes, or maybe your desires, or deeper parts of you that you would like to hide, on full display. And you have to encounter that directly. And so the conversations that have been really helpful and really hopeful are conversations to say, I think we can still save for something in our future. And I think that we can save for special occasions to celebrate one another. But I also think that we have to spend like we have a set amount of money, not that we have unlimited funds and that everything we touch turns to gold. And so the conversations that were good, I think were really good. And the conversations that were hard helped us reveal to ourselves or to each other that we have fears that sit with us all day, or sometimes longer than we would like. And until we bring that out for the other person to see, we don't truly know each other, and we weren't able to cover our debts on our own. So now it's our debt. It's not your debt or my debt. It's ours.
Looking back, is there anything you regret about your past financial situation?
I've purchased a few things that I realized later, maybe that was unwise. I tend to become very excited about new things. I recently started fishing a few years ago, and I wasn't buying the most expensive fishing rods, but I also would go to Walmart for normal things, and I'd say, "Well, let me go take a look at the fishing aisle because I think there's some new lures that I remember donating to the river last week." And also, I heard if I get some of these live bait, that's a different experience I can have. That type of personality trait or disorder, if you'd like to classify it as such. For me, I get really excited about some new hobby or some new goal or journey that I want to accomplish or to strive for. And I kind of throw the budget out the window because I'm excited and because I'm happy and because I want to live my life or whatever justification I came up with at the time. And I've had a few things like that. When I went to school for video production and editing, I realized I think I need to buy a camera. But once I bought the camera, I started buying accessories and I kind of shut that part of my brain off. And I've recognized I have a tendency to say, I'll save for the big portion. If it's a car, I'll save for, the car. But I didn't realize I had to save for the insurance or factor in the gas or factor in the maintenance or factor in, oh, there's something that needs replaced right away, and that's an additional thing. So I don't know if I have any major regrets when it comes to purchases, but during lockdown and post pandemic, I realized there's a lot of things that are kind of fun to buy that I don't need to own. I started buying and reselling sneakers, and a lot of the enjoyment out of spending was the enjoyment of looking at the shoes and spending money on the shoes. But then I also got to turn around and resell them. So I didn't have to have any of the emotional or financial connection to it from there. And I think that helped me realize everything that I spend money on, I don't need to keep, but it is kind of fun sometimes to have that connection with a hobby that you like.
A lot of people do feel that way. And, that's probably why a lot of people are in debt and they may feel like it's not something they can discuss. So, what advice would you give someone who is hesitant about reaching out to a nonprofit credit counseling company about their debt?
The advice I would give for sure is that it's definitely worth having the conversation if you are already aware or if you've ever seen someone in debt before. Most of us believe that we have to get out of it on our own. And on our own either means becoming obscenely wealthy. I guess that's one way, and the other way is just working really hard and saying no to everything in life. And there's probably some combination of both of those two that are required, but the fear in calling and telling someone your situation, I think, is mostly just boiled down to shame and embarrassment. And I have never seen anyone become healthy emotionally or financially while carrying the shame. They have to present that shame at some point, and they have to admit their mistake or they have to admit their weakness. And what I would tell someone is I would say, hey, if you feel too nervous or too scared to call and discuss your situation, I can sit next to you or I can actually say all of it for you. You can slide me a piece of paper that has all of your numbers written down. And to me, they're just numbers. I still see you as the same person. And the counselor on the phone will they're a stranger to you, by the way. They're not going to carry this onto their life and say, I heard someone share this awful debt story with me and I'm going to find them online and I'm going to ridicule them on Facebook. They're not going to do anything like that because it's their job to help give you a lifeline. And my advice is really talk to somebody who you feel like will give you the time of day to hear you out and to sit with you in the emotional weightiness of what you're feeling, but also tell you through their experience, this is what I've seen help and this is how I've seen it hurt. So for you, you can continue hurting or you can continue hurting while you're getting help. And if you're ready to have that conversation, I think you're ready to take next steps forward. But if you're not ready, I hope you're ready to keep making the minimum payments, and I hope you're ready to keep paying the interest that you are, because you have to at least do one. You can't do neither like I did.
What are you currently doing while you're on the DMP to help you stay out of debt?
The biggest thing that I found out from me personally is I consider anything over $40 to be expensive and anything under $39 to be a bargain. I don't know why I feel that way. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what happened to me when I was younger that made me think, $40 is expensive. And what I realized is there are certain things that I would say are so small that they don't reflect in the budget, which is just wildly untrue. And there are some things that are so expensive that they're not worth the time of saving and spending, which also is untrue. I wouldn't say every house over $40 is expensive. So of course there's some relativism that comes into play. But what I've done while being on the debt management plan is to say, well, I have this monthly payment that I have to make no matter what. So now this is a need. This is no longer a want. I don't want to pay off my debt. I actually need to pay off my debt. And if I know that this is part of my budget for me to make this much money to spend on my debt management plan, then that also accounts for me being able to work. So that's in the budget is my car insurance and gas and being able to get to my job. And the long end of it is I realized I probably make more than I think, but I probably spend way more than I'm aware of. And if I can get control of my spending, ironically, spending money on Netflix doesn't feel like a hit of dopamine because I didn't give, $7.99 to Mr. Netflix. It just took from my account. And so that exchange, I think, sometimes make you feel happy that you're spending money for some reason because you believe now you have wealth that you can spread around. But I've noticed that when everything is automated, that either lowers the dopamine, which then helps me not crave spending, which can be good. But also, if everything is on a subscription model where I don't recognize it's happening, as long as my budget is set from the beginning of the month, then I know that I'm covered because I know how much I'll make this month. I know where all of it's going, and every dollar is accounted for. So if I do have a Chick-fil-A craving, on Friday evening after working a long day, now it's a real conversation to say, well, should I spend this money and can I spend this money and is this a good use of money versus yes because I worked hard or no because I'm not wealthy yet. That gray area became more of a helpful conversation rather than a attacking conversation towards myself.
And you mentioned a budget, so you do have a budget in place now.
I do, and I didn't before, and now I realize that budgets are budgets are everyone's least favorite B word, I would say, until you recognize that your budget can be your best friend. Because if you budget for saving for a cruise or saving for international travel, that's a fun budget. And if you budget for the amount of money that you get to go on date nights or for your gym membership or things that you love, then when you recognize the budget set for this amount of dollars per month for groceries or this amount a month for non-discretionary spending money, that also means that everything has its purpose and everything has its place. But before, budget just meant restriction. Budget meant I can't afford it. If I told my friends, hey, I can't spend time with you because it's not in the budget, that sounded like a defense mechanism for me to say, well, I don't want to spend time with you. But I realized budget just means I can see one movie with you this month, not 10 movies. And there's a huge difference between one and zero, but it all felt negative to me before I started using one.
Now that you have your budget in place, that's great. So once you finish your DMP, do you have any financial goals you'd like to accomplish?
I I think that I do. Ironically, because I started my DMP earlier than my wife, my new goal is to take her monthly payments and then make them my monthly payments. And I know that's kind of funny to say that my goal when I pay off my debt is to pay off more debt, but it really does help when you recognize if I've spent this much money for this many years on my debt, I can do it for a few more, or I can do it for a few more. But now it's not the same amount only, we just added more to that debt. So the snowball is really taking off when it comes to finishing mine.
Oh, Greg, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really enjoyed our conversation and learning more about your story. I think this is going to resonate really well with my listeners.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here, and I really enjoyed this conversation that we shared.
Yes, thank you so much. It's always inspiring to hear from Navicore clients and learn how they're finding success through the debt management program. During a challenging time, Greg turned to credit cards and a personal loan as a financial lifeline, trying to keep up and avoid feeling left behind. But once he reached out to Navicore, he finally felt empowered and back in control of his finances. Greg has faced more than his fair share of challenges, but he's now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. He even referred his wife to Navicore, and together they're both enrolled in the program. They've become a united financial team, committed to breaking old spending habits and building a more secure future. With a solid budget in place, Greg is staying disciplined and determined not to fall back into debt. And with that, we wrap up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us there. I'll talk to you next time, Millennials, Gen Z, and everyone else tuning in. Bye.